We live in an increasingly divided world where our political parties, religious convictions, and personal identities are used to polarize and pit us against one another. As the ancient prophets wrote, a house divided cannot stand. This division is literally tearing our world apart. The only path to create true and lasting healing in our world is to come together with civility, respect, and honesty, sharing our stories and discussing our perspectives across our deepest divides. Welcome to the Patchwork Podcast with author, pastor, and activist Brandon Robertson. In every episode, we seek to cultivate compelling conversations to help bring clarity and understanding to some of the most controversial topics of our day, with the hope of bridging our collective divides one conversation at a time. So thank you for joining us on this journey together. Let's listen to this week's conversation.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Patchwork Podcast. I'm Brandon Robertson, your host. And today I'm really excited to dig into a conversation with an incredible guest named Rima Zaman. Rima is an award-winning writer, speaker, sexual assault survivor, and recovery coach. She was born in Bangladesh, raised in Thailand, and presently resides in Oregon. And she has a double BA in gender studies and theater from Skidmore College. She's the author of an incredible book called I Am Yours. And it's a beautiful memoir that details the struggles that Rima has had throughout her life. But as I dug into this conversation with her, we really centered around the power of empathy, the power of changing the minds of even the people that we perceive of our enemies. And in this day and age, we are a very divided people. I mean, that's kind of the point of this podcast, that we often look at those who see the world differently, who believe differently, who do differently, who maybe do things we consider wrong or harmful, and we demonize them and fail to realize their humanity. At the same time, there's lots of people that are trying to silence voices of minorities, whether that's people of color, whether that's women, sexual minorities, or gender minorities, or the whole plethora of other kinds of different abilities and identities that marginalize people in dominant culture. Rima is someone who's well acquainted with culture trying to keep her silent. Born in a culture that was heavily patriarchal, she struggled to be able to speak her voice, live her truth, be the person she believed she was created to be. And her memoir, her story, her witness on this podcast today is about the journey of finding the courage to stand up against those who oppose and use your voice not just to oppose those who are opposing you, but to actually be a voice for healing, reconciliation, and redemption, which is one of the hardest things we can do as human beings. And yet it's one of the most essential things that we need to do if our world is going to move in any productive, in any healing direction over the coming years. And Lord knows our world needs healing and reconciliation more now than ever before. You know, one phrase that I use that has kind of shaped my ministry and how I do my work in the world in the nonprofit sector is that I once for a long time used to believe that my job was about being a voice for the voiceless. It was about finding marginalized communities and speaking up for them. But as I wrestled in my own self as a gay person in a Christian space, I realized that it wasn't the people speaking up for me that was actually making the change that I needed, the change that would actually liberate me. The people that actually helped to liberate me and help bring about my own change and help bring about transformation in my life and for others were those who gave me back my voice. Meaning those who said, I have a platform, I have some privilege, I'm willing to give that up to you and for you. You can speak on your own behalf, you can tell your own story, you can stand up and represent yourself and people like you better than any ally could. You know, that's not a knock on allyship at all. Allies are important, have an important role. But I do believe that instead of being a voice for the voiceless, the higher, the better, the more impactful call is to give the voiceless back their voice, to give platform to those people who otherwise aren't going to be heard, whose stories are going to be marginalized, and yet are the very people who hold the keys to the liberation of people like them and to our collective liberation. And Rima's story and her witness really summarizes this, in my opinion. And her book, I Am Yours, is an incredible memoir, packed not only with beautiful writing and insight, but packed with lessons, again, that our divided world needs so much today. So without further ado, I'm really excited to present to you my conversation with author, actress, and activist Rima Zaman. Tell us a bit about who you are and what you do in the world, and what is your passion and calling? What is the message that you feel in this season of your life that you are putting out into the world for people to receive?
I love that question. So my name is Rima Zaman. I'm an author, actress, speaker, and educator, and I'm the author of the memoir, I Am Yours. And right now, my calling, I believe, is going to be the same my entire life. It has been thus far. I'm 35, and it's been the same calling. It's just a matter of manifesting it in different stages of my life in different ways. My calling is to be a voice for the stories and souls that have been historically silenced. I'm from Bangladesh, and I happen to be a woman who was born in Bangladesh, in a third world country. And so that informs not only my work, but the urgency and ambition with which I do my work. I grew cognizant from a very young age of the insidious misogyny that plagues my culture and many world cultures that keep women small and docile in our voice, our mentality, in our potential. And so I've dedicated my life, and I will continue dedicating my life to using my work to encourage and empower others to grow into their boldest, bravest self, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of racial or religious background.
What an incredible goal. It's one that is so needed, and because there are so many people in our world and in our culture in particular here in America that have been pushed to the side and silenced and need to be reminded that their voices matter and that they have a message to share, a story to share that's worth listening to and hearing. So I really,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Right, and thank you. And the work is twofold, because part of it is encouragement and empowerment of people on a mindset level, right? And that's what you were talking about, which is like to help people understand that they do have a powerful and vital, significant voice. And then the other is the systemic change that needs to happen on a global and social shift, where that legal systems and justice systems and religious institutions do make substantial change to allow for our voices and stories to really matter, right?
Totally. Yes, that personal and then kind of the corporate, the bigger picture, the systemic.
Absolutely. The societal.
Totally. And so you kind of recount your whole journey and your story in this phenomenal memoir called I Am Yours. And you talk about overcoming toxic environments and abuse. And as you have already said, the memoir kind of specifically centers on this misogyny and this patriarchy that is so toxic and so prevalent in so many cultures around the world, including our own. And you, at one point, described yourself in the midst of that culture as a black hole of a person, as a result of this culture of male superiority and almost, it might be too strong to say, but an ownership of women.
Yes, no, I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think that's why so many women, we become hollowed out like black holes, where it's there's so much pressure and conditioning to become an idealized version of a woman who speaks to and behaves to the orders of male superiority. That was certainly what I saw growing up in the cultures I grew up in. And like you said, it's pervasive all around the world, just in different degrees.
Totally. And kind of on that note, it's easy for those of us in the Western world to look at the rest of other cultures in the world and kind of cast that stone of judgment for the way that patriarchy manifests.
But we also know, looking at the current moment of American history that we're sitting in, that
Right.
we're seeing this resurgence of patriarchy, misogyny, racism, homophobia. Can you talk a bit about one, kind of that Western
Mm.
superiority, and also how is your message and your experience and what you've learned on your journey of life? What kind of message do you bring to those of us in the Western world right now that are kind of being re-steeped in patriarchy in some ways?
Oh, that's a phenomenal question. Both of those two, that two-parter is great. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, so what I think about that is, like I said, it's just misogyny or toxic masculinity, I believe, is the foundation for all of the prejudices in the world, because toxic masculinity is a culture that says the most important person is the the male authoritarian voice, right? And that can then manifest as racism, as any kind of othering.
Mm.
And it certainly can, that's how patriarchy stems from. And it's a top down ideology. That's what toxic masculinity, which is essentially toxic aggression, that's how it functions. And so that's how I understand the resurgence we've had is actually, resurgence is a phenomenal word. And it's also, it's like when all of the muck from the ocean floor is dredged up again. It's not like all of a sudden we have misogyny and racism running rampant through the United States. It was always there. It's just with the current administration and the current president of the United States, they have normalized vile, hateful rhetoric toward anyone who is anything different than a white, straight man of a certain economic bracket and mindset. And so they have normalized hatred toward basically most of us. And that's why we're hearing it all the more loudly. But it has been there under the surface all the time. I'm certainly, I vowed that it's always been there because I have felt it my entire life.
Totally.
And so now what I bring is, I guess what my work is about unpacking the psychology of abuse culture so that we can get to a deeper understanding of how abusers and bullies operate, so that we can first connect through empathy and compassion by understanding that bullies are created, racists are created, abusers are created. All of us are born as children. We are born innocent, and then we become the love or the hatred that is taught to us or modeled to us, right? Or that is subject or thrust upon us. No child is born hating another child. All of that is learned. And so that's the foundation of my work. And from there, and that is so vital, because without connection, empathy, and compassion, we can't truly get to the critical takeaways and lessons we need to understand about each other's psychology to actually heal and progress as a world community.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And I always say that shame is because a lot of people, they think, well, an eye for an eye, and those who have punished us, they deserve punishment. And yes, it's true, people do deserve accountability and justice, but justice is different than hateful eye for an eye or shaming. And I believe to shame a person limits their capacity for growth, which is to say, to shame a human being limits society's capacity for growth. And so, as you know, all of my work is rooted in this deep, compassionate love for fellow human beings, so that we may actually understand why people become abusive. And then by understanding, we have the chance to evolve.
Totally. And one of the things that I think is remarkable about your work is that you've been spending a lot of time talking to younger people and children about your journey and your story and your life lessons that you've learned thus far. I wonder, how do we start at a young age making sure that children aren't becoming indoctrinated with patriarchy and misogyny?
That's a beautiful question. You've nailed exactly why I do that work in high schools. So for those who are just listening for the first time, what Brandon is talking about is I've had the privilege of my memoir, I Am Yours, has already been adopted into several high schools throughout Oregon. And there are plans for other high schools throughout the nation to begin adopting it and teaching it in their English language arts curriculum starting in this fall. But it was already adopted into Oregon school systems in February 2019, which is when the book was launched into the world. And I'm so passionate about this behavior because it's about preventative care, just like how you said, versus retroactive action or healing, right? Which is just as necessary to heal as adults. But if we can interrupt a young person's life and give them the tools they need to be more empathic toward people who appear different, or if we can interrupt their lives and give them the toolkit they need to feel empowered in their voices and stories, that radically changes the trajectory of their lives for the positive.
Totally. Yeah. And I feel like it's kind of a no-brainer. And
Yeah.
this hasn't been done very often in our country or culture. We haven't diagnosed this problem of patriarchy and then started addressing it in such a way as you are. So I'm excited to see that happening in
Thank
Oregon.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, one of my, I'm the greatest pride in my life really is, because it's interesting. I coach other authors on how to not only write books, but then to design their ideal career moving forward. And I always ask them, well, instead of looking outside in, instead of saying, well, I want to become a New York Times bestseller. Okay, that's wonderful. But let's go inside out. What's the mission statement for your life? What are the values that really govern your happiness? What is the thing that will make you truly feel like you have contributed something toward service and legacy on a large scale? And for me, it's always been to be of service to young people so that they have the tools they need to lead the most loving, successful lives. And it is the greatest pride and achievement in my life to be working with these young people and to be having these conversations when they're 15, 16, 17, 18. I had this amazing conversation with one of my students. He emailed me on a random Saturday evening. So meaning that he's been thinking about this, and school is out, right? So it's not like this was a class assignment. It was just this past Saturday. He emailed me and it was like 10:41 p.m. And so this young man has been up considering these questions, and his email subject line was, how do we lessen the likelihood of rapists to exist? Which is such a profound question for a young man of 17 to ask.
Right.
And we had this long engaged conversation back and forth because he said, well, do we have to have harsher laws and prison systems? Like, do we need to invoke the death penalty toward rapists? And I said, I don't think human psychology doesn't respond to punishment. Studies have shown that the only way to create deep, profound social change and human behavioral change is to go back to the beginning of that person's story, which is to say, yes, if you look at the data, most rapists have themselves come from a childhood of abuse, whether it's sexual abuse or physical abuse or verbal abuse. They've come from profoundly hard, difficult childhoods where they were shown and told that they were insignificant and worthless. And that's the narrative that became their own, and that's the narrative they started thrusting upon other human beings. There's always a story, right? And so we were having this conversation. He said, well, so how do we lessen the chances of having rapists? And I said, well, it has to be on a systemic social level. We need to be raising ourselves and our young men and young women with a greater respect and kindness toward women, the way we father our sons, the way we mother our sons, the way we mother our daughters, and the way we are fathers to our daughters, to rate all of these things. And then we started talking about how there was such a normalization of violence in our culture, of a normalization and celebration. I mean, look at the administration, where they flaunt violent rhetoric as though it's something to be celebrated and proud of. But then on an even smaller level, there's violent video games and violent porn and violent movies. And so much of the violence is directed toward women. And so all of this, everything from, a comedian with a large platform making a rape joke, all of that is the insidious language and messaging that we are seeped inside. And all of that contributes to rape culture. And so I just love that was my Saturday evening. We're having this email conversation with this young man who I know will make a difference when he becomes a father and a partner in the world.
Totally. Yeah. And kind of on that same note, I mean, one of the power of your book is that you're telling your story with such realness, rawness, authenticity, but it's also the story of multiplied millions of people around the world who have faced similar abuse and discrimination and pain and marginalization. As you've kind of entered into this journey of putting your life out into the world in this way, I think the story you just told is an example or an answer to this question, but what's it been like as you shared your story? How has that been as a personal experience? What have you felt as you've been able to let people peer into your innermost thoughts and your life and what you've struggled through?
Thank you, Brandon. It's been the most fulfilling, gratifying, and life-affirming journey. So the book has been out for 5 months now, right? And it has been glorious. I feel like I have created the family I always craved. A family of people who, like you said, like thousands, who know me so intimately in the most spiritual, emotional sense. And we connect with this great authenticity and vulnerability because that's the way I write, and that's the way I present myself to the world. And the success of the book has proven to me that there are literally thousands of us who are craving that same feeling of connection. And that's why I decided to write the book in this radically tender and intimate way. So for those who haven't read I Am Yours yet, it's written as a love letter to the reader. For 300 pages, I break the fourth wall, which means I speak directly to the reader, and I use the pronoun you. And also, I make sure to treat the reader like they are genderless, raceless, and just human to human. And that was so important to me, to talk to someone as though, genderless, raceless, and ageless, to be just holding this conversation of eye contact as we went through these different experiences together. And I decided to make that real creative risk because it's very rare that a book does that, where the author speaks directly to the audience. And if done poorly, it can be either very abrasive or very cheesy. And so I had to teach myself how to architect this book with great delicacy and precision so it didn't come off as abrasive or forced or cheesy.
Yeah.
And I spent 5 years developing it just right so it balances on this fine line of connection. And I made that decision because, when I sat down to write this in 2013, I could tell that there was a rumble afoot, that even though Obama was our beloved president then, I knew that I just had a feeling that, history swings on a pendulum. And I could feel like there was going to be, like you said, a resurgence of the ugliness that is found in humankind. And it's almost like the last great purging. And I wanted to be prepared with something to offer my fellow human beings in our great time of chaos and need. And I just had this prophecy, this this feeling that, you know, around 2016, 17, 18, 19,
Mhm.
the, I just have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of pain and chaos. And I want to have ready a book that is written in the most tender, loving voice, because when a human being is in pain, or when a culture is in pain, what we need is love. What we need is a reminder that we are more alike than we are different. And what we need is a book that offers tools for healing and navigating trauma.
Mm. And that's such a gift in this moment. I'm so
Thank you.
grateful that you're able to offer that to us in the world in this time.
Thank
And
you so much. And I lived with my mom and my dad during the first year of writing this book,
mm,
and I had never written a single thing in my life. Right now, when people know me as an essayist, an author, and a speaker, but back then I didn't have any of that on my resume, and I was just called to write this book. And I just heard, one day I just woke up with this stern order, this clear voice in my head saying, this is the soundtrack of the book that you were born to conduit into the world. Your task is to simply take dictation from this inner voice.
mm,
And I did that for a year. And my mom will attest that for about a year, I just walked through her house almost in a trance-like state. And to this day, I will say, I don't know if I can take full credit for this.
mm.
It was channeled through me.
I love that. And I've experienced that a little bit myself and heard
Right.
lots of amazing writers talk about this experience of writing, and it's coming, I think, somewhere from within. But um,
Right.
I often experience my own writing as writing not what I believe or what I know, but to actually find out what I believe and what I know deep within.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, and you talk about that. I've heard you talk similarly, as you just did, about
Right.
kind of writing your way to liberation. Um, what
Yes.
was that moment of when you started writing for the first time? What made you embark on this journey?
Well, actually, so that's a phenomenal question. So I'd always kept a journal ever since I was 9 years old, 9 or 10. And my mom taught me how to write before I entered elementary school, actually, because she could tell as a young toddler, I just had so many thoughts going through my head. And she taught me how to read and write so that I could put my words into language on the page. And it definitely helped me as a young kid, really almost because I think writing, and you just touched upon this, the act of writing is a lightning rod where it collects all of the electrical sparks moving through our head, and it distills the energy and puts it into a clear form. And we get to see, oh, this is actually what I've been thinking and feeling. Now it's in a clear narrative on the page.
Mm,
And so I'd always kept a journal since I was a little girl. And I used it just to journal for myself and write, terribly awkward teenage poems, as one does. But I'd never considered being a published author. I wasn't one of those kids who always had that dream growing up. My dream was to be an actress. I did that from when I was 15, and I did all the musical theater and Greek tragedies in high school, and then I went to college for that. And in college, I was a theater and women's studies double major. And then I started working as a professional actress in New York. And when I was 25, I met the man who would become my first husband. And I fell in love with him in a desperate, obsessive manner, and vice versa. He was born and raised with enormous privilege, and he was treated like he was the almighty son in his family.
mm,
And I treated him like that as well. And I started to orbit around him. And my entire life became about him. And then my thoughts and the way I was allowed to speak or dress became determined by him. He started what began as this ravenous love became a consumptive love, and he started controlling and policing all of my daily actions and choices. And I, like many young impressionable women, uh, I didn't know yet who I was, and I certainly didn't have a strong enough self-esteem to hold my own against this person whom I loved so much telling me what to do. And so, and it was always in the guise of, well, honey, I love you, and so I want you to do this. And I was so in love with him, I would say, well, yeah, of course, if this is what he wants me to say, or this is how he wants me to dress, I know he's my husband, and, you know, in sickness and in health, and I have vowed to obey him, and so I will obey him. And lo and behold, he started buying me these oversized sweater dresses to, quote unquote, hide me from prying eyes. We would go out to dinner dates with another couple, and then he would tell me, you know, it's arrogant to assume that everyone wants to hear you speak or to hear your opinions. You should talk less because I think you present as arrogant. And I would say, oh my gosh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. And he goes, yeah, well, I'm just telling you this for your own good because I love you. Yeah, you shouldn't speak so much, or you shouldn't laugh this way, or you shouldn't wear your makeup this way because it's pulling focus. And for a while, I just trusted him, and I kept on dimming my light and reining in my voice, lest I pull focus. And then I started thinking, well, whom am I pulling focus from? And I realized, he was saying all of these things because in order to feel superior in the relationship, in order for the focus to remain on him.
Yeah.
And he was telling me to keep myself small and quiet because he believed the only voice allowed in our relationship was his. And I started connecting all of this because I started writing. And initially I started writing as a way to keep documentation for what he was saying to me and what he was doing. In the event, you know, that if he ever grew severely violent and I would need to be my own witness in a court of law. And then also for any of us, any of those who are listening, in any kind of abusive relationship, gaslighting is part of an abuser's arsenal. And gaslighting is when an abusive person uses your words, they twist and weaponize them in a way to make you feel crazy or stupid. And so I started documenting everything that he was saying and I was saying in our daily activities as a way to hold him accountable to his gaslighting, and to say, whenever he would try to say, no, I never said that, or you're making that up, I would hold up my laptop and say, no, here's the timestamp. This is what you said yesterday. I am not crazy and I am not stupid. This is what you said. And then lo and behold, having this daily practice of writing soon became more about me than it was about him, because the more I wrote, the stronger I began to feel, the more confident I became, and the more articulate and eloquent I began to be in my skill over human language. And I started retaliating against him by speaking up against him. So he would try to wage an argument. And initially, in the beginning of our relationship, I would just be so overwhelmed by his rage that I would just become mute. But the more I wrote, the more confident I became in my voice. So I started speaking back. And I started growing literally quicker in my brain, because that's what the practice of daily writing will do. You become sharper. And I started speaking back, and he started looking at me and saying, you are not the girl I married. And I would reply, yes, that's true. I've outgrown you. And we just had this verbal war going on for a while. And he had isolated me in deep upstate New York, and in a half-burnt barn. And it was so remote that we were away from civilization. We had no cell reception because it was in such a remote area. There wasn't another human being around for miles, meaning that I was very careful to tiptoe around his temper because I never wanted to put myself in physical danger. And so I started using language as a way to calm him down, as a way to hold him away from me, and as a way to mollify him. And then I tried for the longest time to get him to see why he was behaving this way, because I could see that he was struggling from deep insecurity, and that's why he was feeling so threatened by my growing intelligence, and then also the success that was coming into my life as an actress. And he was also 11 years older than me. So he could feel that he was growing older while I was coming into my own as a young actress. So all of that compounded together. And so I was writing about all of this initially because I wanted to help him see, you know what, maybe you're struggling from deep insecurity. We can go to therapy. We can work through this. But then the writing became my own solace and my own empowerment. And one day he said, you know, I believe you. I think this is all coming from deep unhappiness and depression in myself. And I'm holding you back. And I'm unwilling to change, but I need to let you go. And that's how, and he evicted me from our home. I was babysitting, and he called me up and he said, you're not allowed to come back home. And I had just handed over all of my money for our mortgage the week before. I had a backpack with 2 changes of clothes. I had my laptop and the $60 I would make that day from babysitting. And I had my newly discovered voice. And instead of feeling rejected, I felt released because I knew that now, having found this writing voice, I had a writing voice that had given me the courage I needed to speak back to a toxic energy in my life. I felt I had a social responsibility to develop that voice and a body of work to offer it as my contribution to others, for anyone who may need it, to feel courageous and validated in their own life.
Wow. What a journey. And I mean, the wisdom that comes out of that kind of a journey is obviously so apparent in the book, I Am Yours. And you've kind of, as to land the airplane, I think you have, through this journey, have discovered, as you said, your own voice. But more than that, you've also discovered how to create the life that you truly wanted and always desired, it seems like you're coming from that terrible situation you just described to this place that you're at today. What wisdom do you have to offer the listener about how that they might do that, how we might find ourselves in that same situation where we have very little, but we also have the freedom to begin to create a new thing with our life?
Thank you. I love that question. And one of my favorite lines in the book is, uncertainty is a form of limitlessness, because it truly is. We have the enormous privilege of living in a country where we have the ability of choice, right? To make choices for our own creative and spiritual growth is such a privilege. And I come from a country, my homeland, where many women do not have that choice. So I'm very cognizant of this enormous privilege. And perhaps that's why I've always used it with such urgency. And just what you touched upon, that that's the reason why I didn't make this book purely about a woman finding her freedom from an abusive marriage. That section of the book is act number 2. But the book, there's 4 acts in the book. And the final act is exactly that, where I'm creating the life that I believe I was born to fulfill. And for anyone who knows that they hold deep, untapped potential inside of them, what I would say is lean into that, protect it as you would a child, because that is your child self's promise. The amazing promise and potential you hold inside deserves to be protected and nurtured the way you would the potential and promise within a child. And you have to become its greatest protector and advocate. This means making choices that help you move toward and not away from your greatest fulfillment. I definitely, when I heard this call to action in my mind, saying that this is the book you were born to write, I made 3 very clear lists. 1, the list of a list of qualities and attributes that I wanted to possess as my best self one day. 2, the list of qualities and attributes I wanted in my future book. And 3, the list of qualities and attributes I want in a future partner and in the kind of people I surround myself with. And then once I gained clarity about these 3 parts of my life, my task was then to hold myself accountable to these lists and to come up with a clear schedule of daily activities that would let me move toward the fulfillment of those 3 lists. And all of us, we have 24 hours a day, and it can feel like very little, but time is fluid and it's entirely based, the quality of time every day is entirely based on how we decide to use our quota of 24 hours a day. You know, we all have the same amount of hours, but different people are exercising that ability in different ways. And so I really ask people to develop the muscle for clarity and then develop a muscle for self-accountability. And once you have those 2 things intact, every day you just do a few different steps to take yourself toward your greatest service, toward your greatest fulfillment.
I love that. The wisdom of taking it one step at a time, even though obviously that list of attributes may be long and lofty, you can get there inch by inch, step by step, day by day.
Yeah, and I think it really does come from accountability and then being protective of yourself. Because I think all of us, most people who have any, iota of self-awareness, they do have a yearning passion or a yearning talent, a learning cause that they want to stitch their life to. And then they fall off the path because they feel pressure to do something else in the name of someone else. And I have immense understanding and compassion for that. And, we think, well, we have to be loving and taking care of everyone else. And it's true, absolutely. But not at the cost of giving up on your greater potential. And that's why it's like we each deserve to be as protective and nurturing with ourselves as we are with other people.
Totally. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Rima, for not only taking time to chat with me today and share a bit of the wisdom that is available in your book and more, but for writing this book and putting it out into the world. I am really astonished by the book in that sense that you can tell
thank you.
There's a voice speaking through you, and you're a conduit of such deep wisdom. And I really do hope everyone listening will go pick up a copy and dig in for themselves. So thank you again for taking some time today.
Thank you so much, Brendan. It is such an honor and privilege to speak with you and be part of your community now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Possess as my best self one day. 2, the list of qualities and attributes I wanted in my future book. And 3, the list of qualities and attributes I want in a future partner and in the kind of people I surround myself with. And then once I gained clarity about these 3 parts of my life, my task was then to hold myself accountable to these lists and to come up with a clear schedule of daily activities that would let me move toward the fulfillment of those 3 lists. And all of us, we have 24 hours a day, and it can feel like very little, but time is fluid and it's entirely based, the quality of time every day is entirely based on how we decide to use our quota of 24 hours a day. We all have the same amount of hours, but different people are exercising that ability in different ways. And so I really ask people to develop the muscle for clarity and then develop a muscle for self-accountability. And once you have those 2 things intact, every day you just do a few different steps to take yourself toward your greatest service, toward your greatest fulfillment.
I love that. The wisdom of taking it one step at a time, even though obviously that list of attributes may be long and lofty. You can get there inch by inch, step by step, day by day.
Yeah. And I think it really does come from accountability and then being protective of yourself. Because I think all of us, most people who have any, iota of self-awareness, they do have a yearning passion or a yearning talent, a learning cause that they want to stitch their life to. And then they fall off the path because they feel pressure to do something else in the name of someone else. And I have immense understanding and compassion for that. And, we think, well, we have to be loving and taking care of everyone else. And it's true, absolutely. But not at the cost of giving up on your greater potential. And that's why it's like we each deserve to be as protective and nurturing with ourselves as we are with other people.
Totally. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Rima, for not only taking time to chat with me today and share a bit of the wisdom that is available in your book and more, but for writing this book and putting it out into the world. I am really astonished by the book in that sense that you can tell
thank you.
There's a voice speaking through you, and you're a conduit of such deep wisdom. And I really do hope everyone listening will go pick up a copy and dig in for themselves. So thank you again for taking some time today.
Thank you so much, Brendan. It is such an honor and privilege to speak with you and be part of your community now. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Patchwork Podcast is brought to you in part by Metanoia, a center for spiritual and social renewal, and Mission Gathering San Diego, a progressive, inclusive Christian church.